Hello everybody, welcome to Ajak Commerce Academy. This is Dr. Ram Kasi Vishwanathan. So we are going to discuss one important topic from managerial accounts for CMA ITER. Okay, now this is based on general student feedback that so in the examination there are questions based on absorption costing, activity based costing, and marginal costing. Right? Now, the general experience that we've had with students when teaching them is when a certain chapter is done in the class, they know for sure that that chapter is going to revolve around, say, absorption costing at one point of time. At another point of time, it would be on ABC and then marginal. So really, they don't have any point of confusion here. What happens is, in the examination question paper, when there is a problem, and you know that the examination question is not going to be out of any chapter or so, it's going to be either a combination, but you will have to identify which chapter it has come from. So there is a certain mix-up that keeps happening about how to deal with arriving at different cost per unit, how to arrive at overhead cost rate, and where to use which principle and all those things. So we thought, let's put this into perspective. Let's give you where each of them have to be used and why did we have three different methods of costing? Why did we not stick to one? If we give you the background of why each of them are there, then it's going to be very easy for you to pick and use this wherever you want. So let's go back a few decades and let's see how the industry looked like. Okay, so we have there a certain cost sheet. Okay, now I'm talking about at least 3 or 4 decades back when primarily the Indian economy was run by manufacturing. Apart from agriculture, manufacturing was the most important aspect. So here what would happen is that if I were to call my cost per unit, it is going to be material cost plus labor cost plus overhead cost. Right? Now, the material and the labor aspect was so pronounced and so high, almost say 70 to 80%, and the overhead was only about 20%. So the overheads means the indirect expenses that we incur, which are not for any one of my product, generally for all of my products. Right? This is how the combination stood at least 2 or 3 decades back. Okay, this was when the tertiary sector or the service sector did not catch speed in India. Now, coming to this day and age, at least for the last decade or so, the service sector has caught up so fast in India. If you ask me how do I express the cost per unit of my service or of my commodity today, I will still say material labor overhead, but for example, let's say it is still material labor overhead, but the overhead expenses today are about 80%. And then this is only the remaining 20%. That is because the nature of how a service industry works. Service industry works where one-time expenses are done, kept and being reused several rounds, and then these expenses that are material labor are pretty much downscaled and used. Reason is why? Because of things like automation, and now more automation because of AI and machine learning and all those things. This aspect is going to be very high, this aspect is going to be very less. Now what does it mean? In the world of absorption costing that existed here. Now here what happened was, I was suppose going to have my products A, B, C, right? If you ask, how do I write the cost per unit for A, B, C? So it is going to be direct material cost. It was going to be, let me put it like that, direct labor cost, and then this overhead. So the overhead is going to be a bunch of expenses that I have already incurred. Say I had incurred 15 lakhs for that year, right? Now, this 15 lakhs, I am going to distribute it between my products. Now, these are direct expenses, okay? So there's no problem here. This 15 lakhs, I'm going to distribute it to my products A, B, C on the basis of, say for example, direct labor. I'm going to use labor hours as to what was the cost per labor hour, how many labor hours were incurred, and then the overhead expenditure that was connected to my product. I'm going to use these absorption rates of labor, material, say machine hours, however I can link. But remember, all those linkages are very, very indirect linkages of how I can connect a product to that expense. There is really no way I can say accurately how is this 15 lakhs distributed. So one of the methods we said was, let's use the production volume to distribute. Volume. Now, volume means, say for example, we produced A, 5,000 units, B, 6,000 units, and C, 3,000 units. So, how this was being done was, this 15 lakh was connected through absorption rates. Okay? Absorption rates like, machine hours, labor hours, okay? And anything that could contribute to these, overhead expenses, or number of employees instead of labor hours. One another identical factor was, or a probably close factor was, number of employees. So use them and distribute to this. What would happen there is, inevitably, always the overhead would be higher where the volume is high and lower where the volume is low. Now, on further investigation, you may find that this is not true. This is just an allocation. Now, when you do an allocation, if the volume is high for one product, it is an allocation, it is not a scientific method. What is going to happen is, the load on this particular product is going to be high. And imagine now, if we are going to make a decision on how do I effectively control my cost, okay? Then eventually that decision will come and say, reduce the cost of B. Now what happens if B is my best product? If B is my best product and I indulge in reducing the cost of B, then what is going to happen is, I'm going to reduce the cost, but at the expense of what? At the expense of my product not performing well in the market. This is what was going to be the problem. So the decision making was far from accurate, but for a want of better method, we were sticking to this absorption costing. This is also called traditional costing, right? Now let's see how are things changed in the ABC, in the activity-based costing world. Okay, let's create some space to write. Now again, I have three products A, B, C. There are some direct expenses and there are some overheads to be allocated, right? Now you will easily see that how activity-based costing is more accurate. And remember, I cannot take another similar factory kind of an example and walk you through, because this is more service sector oriented. So think of say a bank or an insurance company or a courier service agency. Okay, now apart from the direct expenses, the indirect expenses that they are going to do is going to be something like this, like receive packages, okay, assemble them, okay, pack them, okay, and then move in vehicles for transport, right? Now, suppose there are three kinds of products that a courier agency works. When I say product here is, say they work for three different geographies, okay? So the geography could be three cities, let's say Mumbai, Chennai and Delhi. Now, it is very easily identifiable that where did the maximum receipt come from, okay, the number of receipts that came from which cities, okay, and the sending aspect was done to where, okay, and packing, how many hands did I need to pack for each of my geographies. And when I do all those things, then I am going to arrive at something called a cost driver. This cost driver is a specific jargon in the world of activity based costing. What this goes to say is, use the activity, that is the level of activity, as the cost driver to allocate your overheads to your products. That means wherever there is more activity, there is going to be more of overhead expenses. Isn't this now more accurate and scientific than what we saw earlier in the traditional costing method or absorption costing method? Now, this cost driver, it is going to be the set of activities that are done to my respective products. Now, based on the cost driver, now we are going to have cost pools, by the way, okay? Now, cost pools means I have accumulated all the costs that I have incurred into cost pools, and then now I know I can identify more one-on-one basis where I need to allocate them. By doing this, what happens? The cost sheet that I prepare under the ABC is going to be more aligned to reality than estimates and allocations that we did in absorption costing. Now imagine, here we are going to make a decision on how do I optimize my cost, where can I do some cost effective measures in such a way that my product capability is enhanced. When I do that here, the cost and the product relation is much closer and I am going to make a more relevant decision. Similarly, let's close with discussing the marginal costing. Okay. Now, remember, the reason why we do a marginal costing analysis is to decide, okay, to decide that having kept all the fixed expenses aside, okay, to decide that if my incremental cost of making one product or providing one service is going to earn me profit or not. And how do we do that? So, since we kept all fixed expenses on one side, we have another bucket called variable expenses, and what we are going to say is, for that new deal, if I take my sales and if I reduce my variable cost from it, what is the profit that I am getting, or am I not getting a profit? That is why it is not called a profit, it is called a contribution. Okay, and then we try to make decision based on contribution and what went into this contribution, like my labor, material, etc., to see that is that decision good enough for me to take in the interest of my business. So what you have to understand is, all these three techniques are for different business environments at different points of time. So if you read your question in this background, you are not going to mix up yourself as to how do I handle my overheads or fixed costs or which method I should use. It's going to be so very clear. Okay. Thank you. Please make best use of this video.